Greetings and welcome to week 6 of COMM 110, Fundamentals of Public Speaking. This is kind of a big week for us because it is the week in which you are going to get the assignment guidelines for our first major speech, the informative speech, and in which you are going to make a final selection or a final decision as to what your single broad topic is going to be for the 3 major speeches in this course. We have 2 chapters, as we have been having most weeks from the textbook. The 2 topics we're going to be looking at in the textbook and the quizzes this week are first what are called organizational patterns. These are the patterns through which or with which information is organized in speeches. We'll learn about things like spatial organizational patterns, chronological organizational patterns, topical organizational patterns, and a few other sorts of patterns. These patterns are the ways in which you organize the main points of a speech. And you'll learn about all these this week and a little bit more about how organizational patterns work. The second chapter that we're going to be taking a look at is jumping out of sequence a little bit, chapter 16 on informative speaking. Because this is the week in which you're getting the assignment guidelines for the informative speech, this is the week that I have you read that chapter that says a little bit more about the nature of informative speaking and exactly what the objectives of informative speaking are, and some of the things that informative speakers have as objectives as they deliver informative speeches or informative speaking presentations. You will be giving another speaking presentation yourselves this week. The third and last minor speech before we do that first major speech, the informative speech. This week you'll be doing what's called a speech of definition. I allowed you to preview the assignment guidelines for this speech last week, so you may have looked at those already. But what you're going to be doing with the speech of definition is picking a word, an abstract sort of word, an emotion possibly, or a concept of one kind or another, and doing a little bit of research into the denotation of that word, the dictionary definition, as well as antonyms and synonyms, and then also talking about connotative meanings. What does the word mean to you? You can read all of the details about it in the assignment guidelines for the speech of definition, but there are 2 things sort of in terms of what this speech represents that are milestones for us this week as well. The first is that this is the first speech that you have a specific time frame that you're supposed to hit, and that if you are either too short or too long, you will lose points on the speech. The speech of definition has to be at least 3 minutes in length, no less than 3 minutes, and no more than 4 minutes. Now this is very important, and your major speeches will have low and high limits for the time as well. The skill of public speaking is one in which you have to be able to hit a particular time frame that you are given. If someone wants you to speak for 10 or 15 minutes, you have to be able to develop material and then deliver it effectively within the time frame that you have been given. And the upper limit of that time frame is just as important as the lower limit. You want to make sure that you've got enough material to meet the lower end of a time limit, but you also want to make sure that you do not have too much material, or that you are not rambling on about your material so that you speak too long or longer than you are supposed to be speaking. So this is the first speech then that has time limits as far as time range that you're going to be required to hit. The other thing is that this is the first speech that you're going to be submitting preparation paperwork. Of course, for the major speeches, you'll be submitting a whole group of preparation paperwork, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of this video when I say a few words about the informative speeches. But the speech of definition is the first one in which you're going to have to submit some preparation paperwork, and you can see the details for that in the assignment guidelines as well. And for all of the speeches, the remaining minor and major speeches that you have in the class, where you're going to be submitting paperwork, there are drop boxes that are or will be set up on eCollege for you to submit that paperwork to. So probably the highlight of this week is you moving a little bit more closer to doing that informative speech, our first major speech. You're going to be selecting by the end of this week, you're going to be selecting your single broad topic that you will use for all three of the major speeches. You started that last week with your list of 5 broad topics that you submitted and that I will have given you some feedback on. In the discussion this week, our discussion topic relates to your candidates or your potential broad topics. What you'll be doing is taking that list of 5 broad topics that you submitted last week and narrowing it down to just 2 broad topics from that list of 5, and then talking about those 2 in the discussion forum and having the opportunity to get some feedback from your classmates as to which of those 2 broad topics might seem like the better one to do for the broad topic that you're going to use for all three major speeches. Then at the very end of this week, right before next week's course plan starts, you will submit to me which of those 2 finalists is going to be your final choice of a single broad topic for the major speeches in the class. And then, of course, you get a chance to read for the first time the assignment guidelines for the informative speech this week. Download those from the weekly homepage and read over those carefully. That might be something that you want to take a little break to do right now before I talk about some of the details, or else you can watch the rest of this video now, look at the guidelines, and maybe come back and watch the last part of this video that you're watching now. But just a few highlights about the assignment guidelines. And most of these will apply to all 3 of your major speeches. The time limit for the major speeches, the informative, the visual aid, and the persuasive speech, are between 6 and 8 minutes. So you have to have at least 6-minute long speech, but not longer than an 8-minute long speech. So somewhere in that range of 6 to 8 minutes. Now, I am not a timing Nazi. If you have a speech that comes in at 5 minutes and 50 seconds, or one that goes slightly over to 8 minutes and 15 seconds, I am not going to take off points for that. But if you have one that's considerably short, like just maybe a little over 5 minutes, or if you have one that's 9.5 minutes, or those sorts of things, you're going to lose significant points on the grade for the speech, because part of the exercise is that you are learning how to prepare material and deliver material that is pegged to a certain specific time frame. The informative speech, as all 3 major speeches, is worth 100 points. Each of the 3 speeches being worth 100 points makes up a pretty major portion of your course grade. And so the 100 points for each of the major speeches is divided into 2 parts. 50 points for the organization and preparation, and 50 points for the delivery. So a rough rule of thumb for understanding that is you're going to get 50 points for everything that you do to get ready for the speech up until when you open your mouth to actually deliver your speech. Then you're going to get 50 points, or half the grade, for what you actually do while you're delivering speech. The delivery itself is going to be worth half the grade as well. And before each of the major speeches, I will give to you for you to look at the grading checklist that I will be using to evaluate the major speeches. That is sort of a checklist of different items in each of these two areas, the organization, preparation, and the delivery, as far as more specific things that I'm going to be grading these speeches on. For the informative speech as well as the others, you're going to need 5 research sources. You're going to need to have a works cited page as one of the elements of the paperwork that you'll submit that has 5 research sources on it. You'll be putting those citations for those research sources into MLA, or Modern Language Association, citation format, and I'll be giving you a little more information on that citation format if you're not familiar with it, just prior to when the informative speech is due. And the works cited page is going to need to be an annotated works cited page. I will give you more information as to what that means as well, but basically what it means is that in addition to having the citation entry in the works cited page, I'm also going to want you to write just a short paragraph of a sentence or two telling what information you got out of that particular source that you are using in your works cited page. You will prepare and submit a content outline, which is going to lay out what the structure or organizational pattern of your speech is. It's going to have a heading on it that will give different pieces of information like your thesis statement, your topic, and so forth. And next week, I think, is when we're going to go over how to do outlining for a speech. We haven't gone over that yet, but within another week or two, you will have a pretty good background on creating a content outline. We've got a whole chapter in our text that we're going to be looking at that's devoted exclusively to creating outlines for a speech. Speaking notes is another thing that you're going to be submitting, and the speaking notes are distinct from and a separate product or a written object from the outline. And when we look at outlining, we'll look a little bit at what speaking notes are and how they're used as well. Like the speeches you've already been doing, the major speeches are going to need to have an audience of at least 3 adults. And if you do not have that audience and show that audience on screen at the beginning and at the end of the speech, I just will not grade it, because if I can't see the audience on camera, I'm going to assume that there was no audience. And if there was no audience, if you delivered a speech without doing it to an audience, then you have not been engaging in public speaking. So that is hopefully familiar to you by now. You can let me know if you have any questions. And we do need to have 3 adults. You can't have any children counting in that audience of 3 people. As I say in the audience guidelines, adolescents are fine. I know many of you in this class this semester are high school students, and other high school students or anybody that is of high school age will work just fine, because they are old enough to understand what you are talking about when you're delivering a speech. Whereas younger children, elementary age or younger, certainly would not be in that situation. I want to make sure that everybody is following the presentation guidelines as well that I gave you in the guidelines for recording and submitting your speeches that you got the very first week of the semester. You need to make sure that you have your webcam oriented the right way, that you are delivering the speech not to the webcam but to the audience that you have there actually in the room with you. You can treat the webcam as one additional audience member, but you should be making eye contact with the live audience that you're speaking to and not just with the webcam. And there's a few other things in those guidelines for recording and submitting speeches that you can review and make sure that you're following those guidelines when you record your major speeches as well as the minor speeches that you've been doing. So if you have any questions about our coursework that we're doing this week, as far as the 2 chapters, the speech of definition, please let me know. Same thing with making a decision about what your single broad topic is going to be for the semester. And then, of course, if you have any questions about the guidelines or my expectations for the informative speeches this week or as we go forward here over the next few weeks, getting closer to when you're going to be submitting those informative speeches, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on anything connected with our class.